Change your life. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that feels like a warm blanket on a quiet night, but the heavy kind that presses on your chest. The kind that follows you into the room and sits beside you, reminding you that something is missing. I stood by the window of my small apartment, watching the city move without me. Cars passed. People laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere, music played. Life was happening everywhere except inside me. I used to believe that life changed suddenly. I believed one big moment would arrive and everything would be different. A promotion. A miracle. A lucky break. I waited for that moment for years, sitting still while time kept moving. One day, I realized something painful. Life was not waiting for me. Life was walking past me, and I was standing still. That morning felt ordinary, but something inside me had shifted. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The face staring back looked tired, not from work or lack of sleep, but from disappointment. Disappointment I had been carrying quietly for a long time. I whispered to myself that I was fine, but my eyes told the truth. I was surviving, not living. I made coffee and sat at the small kitchen table. The chair creaked, just like it always did. Everything in that room was familiar, almost too familiar. The same table. The same mug. The same routine. I realized my life had become a loop, repeating itself day after day, and I had stopped asking myself if this was really what I wanted. I thought about my younger self. The person who believed anything was possible. The person who stayed up late dreaming about a future filled with purpose and excitement. Somewhere along the way, that voice had grown quiet. Responsibilities replaced dreams. Fear replaced courage. Comfort replaced curiosity. I told myself I was being realistic. But deep down, I knew I was being afraid. Later that day, I walked to a park near my apartment. The tree swayed gently in the wind, and children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. An older man sat on a bench nearby, feeding birds with careful movements. His face was calm, peaceful in a way that caught my attention. I sat on the opposite end of the bench, lost in my thoughts. After a while, the man spoke without looking at me. "You look like someone who's been thinking too much," he said. I laughed softly, surprised. "I guess I have." He nodded. That's usually where change begins. I asked him what he meant, and he finally turned toward me. His eyes were kind, sharp with experience. He told me that most people wait for life to change, but life only changes when people decide to change themselves. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to say it wasn't that simple. That life was complicated. That circumstances mattered. But I stayed quiet because a part of me knew he was right. He told me about his own life. How he once stayed in a job he hated because it felt safe. How years passed quietly until one day he realized he was living someone else's idea of success. He said the hardest part was not changing his life, but admitting he needed to. "Fear doesn't disappear," he said. "You just learn to walk with it." When he stood to leave, he smiled and said something that stayed with me long after he walked away. "Don't wait for permission to live your life." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. I thought about how often I asked for permission without realizing it. Permission from family. Permission from society. Permission from my own doubts. I had built invisible walls around myself and called them responsibility. The next morning, I did something small but unusual. I woke up earlier than usual and sat quietly before the world got loud. No phone. No distractions. Just me and my thoughts. At first, it felt uncomfortable. My mind tried to escape, searching for excuses, distractions, noise. But I stayed. I asked myself questions I had been avoiding. What did I want? What scared me the most? What would I regret not trying? The answers came slowly, honestly, and sometimes painfully. I realized I had been avoiding change because change meant uncertainty. And uncertainty meant risk. But staying the same was also a risk, one that quietly stole time. I started paying attention to my habits. The way I spoke to myself. The way I avoided challenges. The way I waited for confidence instead of building it. I realized my life wasn't shaped by one big decision, but by many small choices I repeated every day without thinking, so I began to choose differently. I spoke kindly to myself, even when I failed. I tried things I wasn't good at. I allowed myself to be a beginner again. Some days felt awkward. Some days felt discouraging. But something interesting happened. I felt alive. Not comfortable, but alive. I started taking walks without headphones, just listening to the world. I noticed things I had ignored before. The rhythm of footsteps on concrete. Conversations floating through the air. The sound of my own breathing when I walked uphill. These small moments grounded me, reminding me that life wasn't something happening later. It was happening now. At work, I stopped hiding. I shared ideas even when my voice shook. Sometimes people listened. Sometimes they didn't. But I learned something important. Being seen mattered more than being perfect. I reached out to people I had lost touch with. Old friends. Family members. Conversations felt different now. More honest. Less rushed. I stopped pretending everything was fine and started telling the truth. To my surprise, honesty didn't push people away. It pulled them closer, of course. Fear didn't disappear. It showed up often, especially when I tried something new. But I stopped treating fear like a stop sign. I treated it like a signal that I was stepping into growth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I sat by the same window where I once felt stuck. The city still moved, just like before. But I felt different. Not because everything in my life had changed, but because I had changed how I showed up in my life. I understood something clearly for the first time. Changing your life doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more of who you already are. I thought about the old man in the park. I wished I could thank him. But maybe he was just a reminder. Placed in my path at the right moment. Life has a quiet way of doing that when you start paying attention. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Progress wasn't always visible. Some days felt heavy again. Some doubts returned. But now I knew something I didn't know before. I had a choice. Every day. In how I thought. In how I acted. In how I responded to life. I stopped waiting for motivation. I learned to move first and let motivation follow. I stopped waiting to feel ready. I learned that readiness grows through action. Change didn't arrive like a dramatic event. It arrived quietly, through consistency, courage, and self-respect. Through choosing growth over comfort. Through trusting myself even when the outcome was uncertain. One morning, I caught my reflection again. This time, the eyes looking back didn't look tired. They looked awake. Not fearless, but brave. Not perfect, but honest, and I smiled because I finally understood that changing your life isn't about escaping who you are. It's about meeting yourself fully and deciding you are worth the effort. If this story resonated with you, remember this. You don't need permission. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need the courage to begin where you are. I share stories like this every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.